right, welcome back to the Advancing Healthcare Innovation Show, and I'm your host, Michael Stamatinos. And if you're new to us, we're just crazy passionate about healthcare innovation and adoption. Our aim is bringing stories about real people that are really innovating within our space. And just look, we've got an action-packed year. We have some wonderful speakers. If you haven't checked out our library of interviews, go back and check it out. I'm very, very excited today to bring to you a dear friend, colleague, Seth Rainford, the President and CEO of Digital Diagnostics. Seth, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's absolutely great to be with you and excited to talk healthcare.
Yeah, for the audience members, I just want to let you know how much grace Seth has, because in our first conversation, it was a phenomenal conversation, but I forgot to hit the record button. So we're doing a second take right now, and it's going to be even better than the first take, right, Seth?
Always fun to talk healthcare twice instead of once. So yeah, no problem at all. Excited to be talking to you.
Yeah, so I mean, Seth, your background is just, it's an incredible background. I think you and I, we connect on a lot of different things, both because we both sold door to door. So if you want to even share a little bit about your background, your humble beginnings in terms of selling vacuums door to door to now, running and leading a fast, rapidly growing organization. If you wouldn't mind maybe just giving us a little bit of color on your background, that might be really helpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Grew up in Indiana. And as I've told a lot of folks, my parents love me dearly, but we just did not have a lot of means financially. So when I went to school after my freshman year, I learned pretty quickly that going to a private school to play sports could be quite expensive. And so that summer, I started selling Kirby vacuums door to door, believe it or not, which I think is what you're referencing. And, you learn perseverance pretty quickly in that situation. And so did that honestly for about 3 years during school, and especially more full-time in the summers. And then that's sort of when I graduated, it was actually a nice thing to have 3 years of business development, kind of hardcore business development experience when I started looking for my first professional job out of school. So wouldn't trade it for the world. Wouldn't want to go back to doing it right now with a family, but certainly was a great experience.
Yeah, and then you kind of dovetailed into other leadership roles within health systems, and now you're leading Digital Diagnostics. Just sort of curious, I think for those that are out there, the world of artificial intelligence has, there's some nuances to it. I think there's after talking with you, there's quite a bit of a difference between autonomous AI and then other types of AI. Would you maybe mind just starting a little bit with that, and also with Digital Diagnostics and the story and where you guys are headed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been fortunate to get to speak at different events, most recently at HIMSS. And when I do those, I've found over time it is super helpful for me to start with a couple definitions, just so we're all kind of tracking on the same page. And so I think what you're referencing is most of what I think folks hear about in the media, read, et cetera, is really referencing what we call assistive AI. In other words, it's AI that ultimately is leading information to a decision maker, usually a provider, who's looking at it and then ultimately making that treatment decision, the diagnosis, et cetera. And so if you've ever heard of clinical decision support tools, of which there are many of which are frankly great, a lot of those really are what we refer to as assistive AI, where ultimately it's just information that's being gathered, analyzed, but the treatment and the decision, the diagnosis still rests with that clinician, right? So you might imagine along the same lines, the clinician is still very much involved. There's time that's needed. And from an expense standpoint, you're still, the system, as well as oftentimes the patient, is still paying for that time. And also the liability thus would rest with the clinician, since they're the one actually making that diagnosis. So that's assistive. What we do at Digital Diagnostics is what we refer to as autonomous AI. And it's in many ways the inverse of what I just spoke about, meaning it's the first time ever that the FDA cleared an autonomous AI to make that decision instead of the clinician. So in our case, our first flagship product is for diabetic retinopathy. and images are taken from the back of a patient's eye with a basic fundus camera. So once you have those images acquired, the AI does its magic, runs on the image, and then produces there in about 10 seconds a real-time point of care diagnostic result for the patient. And so, as you might imagine, in that case, you don't have the same wait time for a diagnosis to be made. You don't have all of the same CPT codes that are being billed. And you also would then expect that the creator of the AI, in this case, us, Digital Diagnostics, would assume liability for the creation of that AI. So if you can understand the difference, then that helps you to start to zoom out a little bit and look at the industry as a whole and think about what we can do both on the patient side to help patients get better access to autonomous AI, certainly in the provider space, where we're automating a more routine part of what they were doing and allowing the patients that actually need to be treated to be triaged to those specialists. And if you look at the healthcare system as a whole, we're not adding in one more thing to bill. Instead, we are replacing a lot of what's happening in a more automated, safe, effective way. So hopefully that is helpful, and also happy to unpack any of that further if necessary.
Yeah, I think it just sounds like when it comes to innovation, I think there's the refinement of processes. In this case, you guys have completely reimagined a process. Initially on what was the feedback and what was the temperament from clinicians? It sounds like today it's a little bit more widely accepted. What was that process like for you guys to have to get it from, where it is today, if you're kind of going back to when you started to where it is today? I mean, what were some of those challenges? What were some of those obstacles that you guys had to overcome, and how did you overcome those? What did you have to do? How did you have to communicate? Obviously, a lot of questions there, but
it's a question we get a lot. I totally get it. Our founder and executive chairman, Dr. Michael Abramoff, loves to tell the story of, I think it was 2012, when Hopkins, I think somebody from Hopkins did an editorial calling him the retinator. In other words, they thought this was sort of revenge of the machines, and that machines were going to replace all human jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So I say that just to tee us up to, to talk about, it hasn't always been a completely smooth glide path. And of course, at least initially, now almost a decade ago, there was some initial pushback to, boy, what's going to happen here? I will tell you though, the last 3 years plus, the provider community all around has been incredibly supportive of what we're doing. In fact, we also like to reference an article that was on the AMA's website saying that we are doing AI the right way. And if you go on our website, digitaldiagnostics.com, you'll actually see our tagline is AI the right way. And so to get around to answering your question, the support really, I think, has come because we have started from an ethical foundation where we're trying to build AI in a responsible way that is unbiased and invariant to race, ethnicity, gender, et cetera. And it's something that meaningfully can impact patient lives, while also, as I mentioned earlier, automating some of the more routine, mundane tasks for providers and their staff to ultimately get patients over to the specialists so that they can be treated. So what that allows is the folks in primary care setting to have more stickiness, more tools, more value for their patients. What it does for the specialists is it provides for a stream of patients that actually allow them to practice top of license to do treatment for the patients that actually need to see them for that disease. So all in all, I would say not only those communities, but also CMS, for example. I mentioned the AMA before, NCQA, I need to mention, from a HEDIS and STAR standpoint, have all just been great supporters of what we're doing. And I think that, look, there will always be some detractors out there really questioning, exactly what this will do into the future for jobs and other things. But I think anybody that's really taken the time to unpack the quality, the safety, how effective this is, and the value that we're providing in terms of access to patients, it becomes a much different conversation once that happens.
Yeah, I think what you've described there, Seth, is just, there's the sexiness of innovation, which talks about all the little wins. But what you just unpacked there in just a few short seconds is that there has to be alignment when it comes to innovation. There's a tremendous part about leadership that plays into it, and there's a level of consistency and transparency that also needs to take place. So you start to get that buy-in. There's been a lot of uncertainty within the last 12 months with everything that's been going on. Have there been some other things that have surprised you about how maybe the public is taken to this, or maybe little wins that are worth noting in terms of providing access? Because obviously when you mentioned about in general the social determinants of health, how does something like autonomous AI can work in potentially some communities that maybe don't have access to specialists? I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I would say I haven't been surprised necessarily, but we have definitely seen an uptick in adoption probably since all of this has started. Of course, after we got over the first wave of both uncertainty and just the overwhelming amount of demand for healthcare services. Well, a couple things have happened. We've had new folks come into the fold and say, hey, we are just really short-staffed, or our staff is really working on important stuff as it relates to COVID. What other areas of our business are we using resources that we could look to automate so that those staff can focus on higher value tasks? You might imagine, given what we've talked about up until this point, it was a very nice opportunity for us to say, you should automate your diabetic eye exams, and then allow your staff to really focus on some of those other obvious things. Number one. Number two, especially when we talked about an era of social distancing and how important it is to be safe, especially with uncertainty. If you can imagine obviating the need for that extra visit for the patient, right? So current standard of care today might be a patient with diabetes presents to their primary care physician. They get a referral to a specialist to go get their eyes checked to make sure they don't have diabetic retinopathy. And so you have multiple visits there spanning different time, as well as the cost of doing so. With our technology, we're actually placing this in primary care, as I had mentioned, and right there at the point of care, that patient is getting a result, a diagnostic result, so that they know, do I need to make this extra visit or not? So first of all, as I mentioned, we're obviating the need for that extra visit. So they're not having a whole nother set of interactions, a whole nother waiting room, et cetera. So that just has been very helpful. Not to mention the financial and economic impact of this, or the folks that are just frankly non-compliant, where they are focusing on other things, not I need to go get my annual diabetic eye exam. So we're really helping to drive up compliance rates in sort of this new world we're in. And I think we've been pleasantly surprised that we've been able to add value in a meaningful way, during this whole thing that we've gone through. So maybe a little bit of a surprise there, but I think we've been encouraged by adoption of our technology kind of throughout this time, and it's led us to a place where we really feel like we're ready to double down on everything we're working on, because we see the value starting to play out in the marketplace.
Well, let's talk about some of the other things that you guys are working on, to the degree that you're able to share, by the way.
You bet. So first product, of course, diabetic retinopathy within the eye. There are a number of other things we can do with images taken from back of the eye. We acquired a company actually during the middle of the pandemic that is doing something similar with dermatology. So that will likely be the next trial we start, is for, you can think of something like an iPhone, dermatoscope to the back of the iPhone, and then acquiring images in a similar fashion that you would do back of the eye. And then the thesis, though, remains the same. Place this device at point of care in primary care, and enable that decision instantaneously, so that then treatment decisions or necessary referrals can then be made. So dermatology, likely the next stop. We have also explored a number of things in cardiology, Alzheimer's, and as well as other things that are probably a little bit further down the road. But yeah, the foreseeable future has some pretty cool products coming that I think will hopefully continue to really improve access for patients in a really special way. It is one thing that, back to your question around the pandemic, that I think we've noticed a little bit more that I didn't comment on, is some of these underserved areas or healthcare deserts where we've seen a bit of inequality in terms of the level of care or access to care has just been exacerbated. It has been something I think we've all read about and perhaps even seen ourselves. And so when you think about our technology, all we really need is a power outlet. And once you enable that tech, if you think about the power of having something that you can just plug in anywhere, and you're enabling high quality, rigorously validated, FDA cleared specialist quality care anywhere you can plug it in, I think we'd like to say that we're meaningfully moving the needle in helping to improve access, especially in some of these underserved areas. So we hope to continue to do that, of course, with other products, and time will tell, sort of how that goes. But we're pretty excited about it.
So what's like the matrix that you run it through in terms of discerning what the next area of impact is going to be? Walk us through how you and the leadership team kind of really decide that.
Well, I can't give away too much there because that's a little bit part of our secret sauce, but I'll give you broad
Sure.
strokes, Michael.
Yeah.
And they're obvious, right? Any different disease state that you can get clean images and a clean data set, to train on is sort of elementary or foundational to evaluating future products. We take it seriously that we want to be able to meaningfully show that we change and improve patient outcomes with early diagnosis. So everybody likes to talk about early prevention and early diagnosis. We think we're actually doing that. And in fact, not just a little earlier, much earlier, by getting into primary care, by giving primary care folks tools that they can actually use to diagnose. So I mentioned good images or clean data, meaningfully changing patient outcomes. And there is an element of this where you have to have support from the community that you're working within. I didn't mention earlier, but I should, that AAO in particular, when we started talking about diabetic retinopathy, was tremendously supportive of moving in the right direction with technology while also still supporting their physician base. And I think so far we've seen the Dermatology Association be much the same, where they're forward thinking and they want to adopt new technology that is in fact safe and effective for their patients, but they want to make sure they're doing it in a thoughtful way. So again, back to our tagline, I think the third area I would mention is just how can we do AI the right way with a community of folks that really meaningfully see value that can be returned to them and to their patients. And so that also, to some extent, I think helps inform sort of where we go in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just given the fact that you've clarified assistive AI versus autonomous AI, it just seems like what you guys have done is you've really put yourself into a category of one and set the standard, setting a gold standard. And if we're talking about healthcare innovation, if we're talking about innovation adoption, this is a team sport. And for those that are out there, yes, I'm all about capitalism and everything, but it's great to see an entity that's doing things in a way that maybe others can take affinity from and want to replicate, and continue to do it the right way. So it seems like you guys are in the leading edge category, but what if there were other autonomous AI type of solutions that are coming through the market? It just seems like you guys might have been the ones that have broken out the floodgates, per se.
I'd like to think that we were. I mean, what was cleared by the FDA in the middle of 2018 was absolutely groundbreaking. This idea, the entire health system was set up for providers to make all of those decisions, right? So the FDA clearing something where a computer is actually making that decision instead of a human was absolutely, it was revolutionary. So I would like to think we absolutely are the leader. And, honestly, we would love to see others follow along because there is plenty of room for this kind of innovation in healthcare. There are plenty of patients we all need to reach to do good. And I think the more support there is for doing AI the right way, where it's thoughtful, it's rigorous, it goes through the FDA, it goes through the appropriate channels to make sure that it's safe and effective for patients, the more everybody will benefit. So I certainly hope you're right. And like I said earlier, time will tell.
Yeah, the jury's not out yet, but it just seems like from a supply demand perspective that there aren't enough specialists, clinicians to be able to substantiate the growing demand for this. And there needs to be some level of intervention. And yeah, I think sometimes it's a bit of luck, but timing and relatability, it seems like you guys are in the right space. So I'm very, very, very happy for what you guys are doing. And again, just appreciate everything that you've done in terms of sharing today. So, sort of my last question, because I know we have to kind of taper off here, is, what's one thing that the audience members can take that you would suggest that they can take and implement? Because innovation is nothing without the ability to take action. If there's one thing that you would tell people to take action from this talk, what would that be?
Boy, that's a tough question. I think what you've heard from me throughout our dialogue, and I know when you and I have chatted offline, is starting from a position of that ethical framework and a principled approach towards doing things the right way and not just shortcutting to try and get something out to market that could potentially be harmful or disruptive to the progress we're making. And I guess I would use as an example some of the work that was done with DNA and the human genome and sequencing. And you just see companies perhaps take a bit of a shortcut at times, and then it's like we go into this winter of sorts because everybody is so afraid that things could go wrong, and for good reason. And I just it is we are so on the bleeding edge, and I just so want this to provide the value that it can actually return to healthcare. And so I suppose my encouragement would just be to folks looking at this is to do the extra work to make sure it is in fact safe for patients. You're not building AI that's biased. You're not doing AI in a black box where you just don't understand exactly what's happening after the fact. And I think if that happens, there will continue to be more productive innovation in the space that hopefully everybody benefits from.
Fantastic. And what's the best way for people to continue to follow the good work that's happening at Digital Diagnostics?
So I love LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Seth Rainford is my name. I'd love to connect with anybody and everybody. Our website that I mentioned earlier is a great spot to find stuff on kind of what we're working on, digitaldiagnostics.com. Go check us out there. And of course, we would love to interact with folks. So just would encourage, everybody to reach out with questions or thoughts or interesting topics. So we'd love to talk to them.
Fabulous. So for those that are listening, if you found this content helpful for you, I mean, would you mind sharing it, on social media? Would you mind commenting or even liking it? And I'm very grateful when we can make a difference, whether it's a little golden nugget of information that we can share to maybe give someone the insight, the drive to continue to move forward. When we have more innovators, more doers coming into the community, it just means that we're lifting things up to that next level. So Seth, it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Always fun. And yeah, looking forward to conversation number 3 here sometime in the future.
You bet. All right, take care.